But the reason I ask why this is happening is because we hear a bunch of different reasons from the administration. It doesn't seem like there's anyone settled on one reason. I mean, you just said regime change. Secretary Heggs had said this morning it's not a regime change war.
I think the reason you're hearing so many varied reasons is the varied threats this regime presents.
CNN's Kaitlan Collins recently tore apart MAGA politician Markwayne Mullin during a heated exchange, exposing the weak logic behind his defense of Donald Trump dragging the United States into yet another endless war, this time involving Iran. It was one of those moments where the argument simply collapsed under basic questioning. And Kaitlan Collins did it again not long after, this time bringing another MAGA politician onto her show, Senator Tim Sheehy, who was also trying to defend Donald Trump's reckless decisions in the Middle East. The conversation quickly turned into another tense back and forth as Collins pushed back on the talking points and demanded clear answers. In a moment we're going to look at clips from this interaction between Tim Sheehy and Kaitlan Collins, because the exchange says a lot about how these arguments are being made and defended. I also have some thoughts to share about what was said and what it really means. This is definitely one you don't want to miss, so let's break it down together.
Joining me now is a retired Navy SEAL who serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Republican Senator Tim Sheehy is here. And thank you. I mean, when you see what's happening with what Clarissa's reporting, we saw the attacks on the embassy in Riyadh tonight. Are you worried about how much this is expanding throughout the Middle East and what we're seeing and how Iran is retaliating?
Well, of course, we're always going to be worried about the safety of our allies and our servicemen in the region, and of course, all Americans there. The reality, though, is what this illustrates is just the tentacles of the Iranian influence that have been throughout the region, really for thousands of years. I mean, this is Persia at the end of the day, and the history of this region shows that Persia has historically been, the fulcrum of this entire region. And in the last 46 years, unfortunately, that's turned into a theocratic, oppressive, terrorist regime that has been murdering Americans for 46 years. So I think the fact that this conflict that has been going on for a half century is spreading into every neighboring country is pretty much what everyone expected. Most of the Gulf state allies and our allies in the region, like Jordan, like Saudi Arabia, quite frankly, have long wanted this regime to finally be taken off the map, and I think it's high time it's happened. It's going to be a hard fight. No one thought this was going to be a 3-day campaign, but it's about time we take this threat off the table.
Is that why you think the war in Iran is happening right now? Is it because of regime change?
I think that's pretty clear. There's no question that what's happening in Iran today is a result of decades of exporting terror and evil all over the world. Let's not forget this regime started by taking our embassy hostage, and subsequently, over the subsequent decades, bipartisan. This isn't a Republican-Democrat issue, Caitlin. This is an American issue. This is a Western free world issue. Whether it's the Iranian embassy in London that they took in 1980 after they took ours, or the 1983 barracks bombing, the Khobar Towers, the USS Cole, being the primary provider of cheap oil to China to allow China.
Yeah, no one is saying Iran has been doing good things. I mean, the Iranian leadership. But
well, there's actually quite a few Democrats and folks who are defending the Ayatollah's right to continue to rule and defending his existence. So I think
who is defending the Ayatollah?
Well, let's see. We've had Elizabeth Warren's former campaign manager out there literally chanting death to America on stage yesterday.
I don't know who that is, but Elizabeth Warren is not defending the Ayatollah. But the reason
we've got Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib who are saying that this is wrong. Actually, the New York Times publishing an obituary describing him as an avuncular cleric.
I think that was the Washington Post. But again, that's not a lawmaker. That's not a Democrat who is saying that this is what they did. But the reason I ask why this is happening is because we hear a bunch of different reasons from the administration. It doesn't seem like there's anyone settled on one reason. I mean, you just said regime change. Secretary Heggs had said this morning it's not a regime change war.
I think the reason you're hearing so many varied reasons is the varied threats this regime presents. You heard about taking out their Navy. Their Navy has been used to shut down the Red Sea, the Straits of Hormuz, Suez Canal, the Houthi rebels, which are an extension of a militant group of Iran. You've got Hezbollah, which has been using its northern border with Israel to constantly pressure Israel, and frankly, any Western presence in the Middle East. Hamas, of course, is an attack arm of Iran. You've got their medium-range ballistic missiles, their ICBMs, their nuclear arsenal, their international money laundering campaign for any terrorist organization, and even drug dealing groups. So I think the reason you're hearing different reasons is not because no one's decided what reason it should be, Caitlin. It's because Iran has so many different threat vectors that attack the Western world, to include the U.S., that to effectively restrain their ability to continue to cause chaos, we have to attack all those vectors.
So does that mean the war doesn't end until every single one of those things is eliminated?
Well, you've got the tentacles of the octopus coming out. In order to
that's kind of a yes or no question. Is it once the regime's gone and their naval capability and all of their missiles and any nuclear desires?
Well, I think the likelihood of each one of those tentacles continuing to carry out the policies of this terrorist regime is pretty unlikely if the regime's gone, or if the regime has chosen, hey, we're going to change direction. But I think that's pretty unlikely. For 46 years, obviously, we've only really had two major leaders of this theocracy over the past half century. But this theocracy has been very clear that death to America, death to Israel. We will export terror in the most brutal way possible, torturing our victims to death, whatever it takes, torturing our own people, killing tens of thousands of our own people. So
again, no one is defending Iran's leadership, but I think the question is, if you can't clearly articulate why this started, how do you tell people how it's ending?
How do you not clearly articulate how it started? 1983, 1989, 1980.
I don't remember hearing any Republicans say we should vote for Donald Trump because he's going to go to war with Iran for those reasons. I mean, the president actually ran on not going to war with Iran.
So every single policy decision a president makes has to be the centerpiece of a campaign speech. I think.
I think if you say you're not going to do something and then you do it, I mean, a lot of the president's big allies are saying they're pretty worried about what's actually happening in Iran right now.
Well, I think the reality is America first foreign policy means we're going to stop sending tens and hundreds of billions of dollars to countries that want to kill us. We're going to stop letting a country that murders our people all the time keep doing it. So at what point is enough is enough? At what point are we going to say you are no longer allowed to fire on our ships? You're no longer allowed to start wars in Israel, slaughter 1,200 people in a day. You can no longer launder money for terrorist groups. I mean, the policy towards Iran for the last 46 years essentially has been, we're going to keep giving you money. Just please be nice to us and stop killing people. And it hasn't worked very well. So I think it's pretty clear at this point a change in tack is needed. Do
you support boots on the ground if the president decides that's necessary?
I don't think it's wise. I don't think that's what anyone's planning. I think the reality is decapitating the regime is the number one objective. That, as I said, will have a number of threat vectors, whether it's the fleet, whether it's nukes, whether it's ICBMs, medium range, or taking out proxy groups, whether it's Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, or the remnants of Hamas in Gaza. But weakening all those different vectors makes it harder for that regime to stay in place. And what we are seeing is a lot of organic support inside Iran. Unfortunately, so many of them have been killed over the last couple of months. But hopefully that organic support reaches the point where they can topple their own government and in place their own, hopefully, self-governing system to succeed this.
Do you think the president should help them?
Absolutely.
What would that look like?
Well, there's a number of different ways to do it. I mean, there's a lot of unconventional warfare tactics we have to help support an organic uprising within Iran. That's been going on for the last several months. That this isn't something we have to start from scratch. The Iranian people have made clear, a large portion of them, that they're ready for the theocracy to go. And we can support that in a lot of different ways, from communications to funding to weapons, should they need it.
Senator Tim Sheehy, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
So Tim Sheehy does not seem quite as clueless as Markwayne Mullin, which would be hard to match anyway, because the only senator who might compete with Mullin for that title is Tommy Tuberville. So at least Tim Sheehy does not come across as quite that lost, even though he still sounds just as dishonest in the arguments he makes. There are a few points he tried to push during the exchange that deserve attention, starting with his claim that Democrats are somehow cheering on the Ayatollah, which led Kaitlan Collins to immediately ask the obvious question of who exactly he was talking about. He then mentioned Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, but he never actually showed that either of them praised the Ayatollah or supported him being in power. What they said was that the military action was wrong. The reality is that a large majority of Americans believe the same thing, so by his logic that would mean a huge portion of the country is somehow cheering for the Ayatollah, which obviously makes no sense and exposes how weak that talking point really is. He also stumbled over another talking point when discussing Iran's so-called reign of terror, saying it had been 46 years even though the number being repeated by Donald Trump and others in his party is 47 years, which shows how these arguments are often just memorized lines rather than carefully thought-out positions. Even more telling was that the examples he used to justify conflict with Iran were incidents from 1980, 1983, and 1989, which raises the obvious question of why he could not point to something recent if the threat is supposed to be immediate. Outside of the loud voices pushing for war, most Americans simply do not see Iran as a direct threat to the United States right now. He also tried to frame the issue around the America First movement by arguing that the United States should not be sending money to regimes that harm American interests, yet that claim becomes harder to defend when the country continues sending massive amounts of aid to allies in the region, including support tied to Israel and the long-standing agenda of Benjamin Netanyahu, who has pushed for confrontation with Iran for decades. Kaitlan Collins also pressed him on whether the goal of the conflict was regime change, and his response sounded vague and uncertain, saying it was hard to say because there were many different threats and reasons involved, which came across less like a clear policy explanation and more like someone struggling through a report on a topic they had not fully prepared for. What stood out in the exchange was that Collins kept asking direct, logical questions and did not let the talking points go unchallenged, which is exactly what she did previously with Markwayne Mullin as well. When politicians rely heavily on rehearsed lines, even basic follow-up questions can expose the weakness behind those arguments, and that is exactly what happened here as the discussion continued. So whether it is 47 years, or 46 years as Tim Sheehy tried to say, the question still stands. If Iran has supposedly been this massive threat to the United States for all that time, why didn't Donald Trump do anything about it during his first term? And would Tim Sheehy be cheering this on if Joe Biden had been the one to attack Iran? It is hard to imagine that he would. If Iran really were the serious and immediate danger that these MAGA voices claim it has been for nearly 5 decades, then they should have been demanding that Joe Biden take action while he was president, and they should have been demanding that Donald Trump do the same during his first term. In fact, if their own logic were consistent, the failure to act earlier would mean they should have wanted someone else in office in 2020 and even in 2024. So the obvious question remains, why now? What exactly has changed that suddenly justifies dragging the United States into a war with Iran at this moment? The problem for them is that they cannot clearly explain it, because the reasoning often sounds less like a real strategy and more like simply following whatever the political leader of the moment says. That is why the exchange stood out, because Kaitlan Collins kept asking direct questions that demanded clear answers. She pressed Tim Sheehy on several points, including whether this could lead to American troops on the ground, and while he tried to sound cautious about that possibility, there are already multiple reports suggesting that boots on the ground could become a reality sooner rather than later. If that happens, many of the same voices currently defending the policy will likely rally behind it as well. But what do you think about this entire exchange? Do you feel that Kaitlan Collins held her ground against Tim Sheehy during that interview? Many people believe she asked the kind of direct questions he was not fully prepared to answer. Let me know where you stand in the comments. Are you more convinced by Tim Sheehy's arguments or by Kaitlan Collins' questioning? And if you enjoyed the discussion, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more.